So welcome back to Obviously Fight Talk, and I am delighted to say we are now joined by a legend.
Yeah.
Definitely a legend in mixed martial arts. One
Don't
of my
laugh.
favourites.
Don't laugh.
Don't laugh out there. Yeah, one of my favourites to ever watch. We're joined by the Irish hand grenade, Marcus Davis. So Marcus, welcome along to Obviously Fight Talk, and thank you for taking the time to come on.
No, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. I appreciate calling me a legend. I think that's pretty funny. But no, I appreciate that.
Do you not see yourself as a bit of a legend in or even a pioneer?
Maybe in my own mind, but I'm reminded constantly by my wife and children that that is not a fact. So,
well, we agree with them.
I mean, I think that as far as like the pioneer kind of thing, in that, I was really the guy from the United States that jumped on board, wanting to fight overseas and fight in different countries and play kind of the bad guy, I guess, to a lot of people, because I was never the hometown guy. And that's, when the UFC first started reaching out there and doing a lot of stuff in Europe. And it was pretty cool. I got to fight in 14 different countries as a MMA fighter, and the UFC kind of opened those doors for everybody. And I got to kind of, I don't want to say lead the way, because I don't think I did, but I think 7 or 8 of my fights in the UFC out of 15 were overseas, or maybe even more. I'm really not sure.
Speaking of one of your fights overseas, one of them was here in Dublin at UFC 93. Just talk to us about that experience, because I was watching back just some guys' phone in the crowd and the introduction, and you could barely hear Bruce Buffer say your name just by the cheers that went up. Talk to us how surreal that was, because I know we were very proud of your Irish heritage. So just talk to us a little bit about how that felt for you.
Yeah, no, that was a very... it was like a very emotional time for me. As a boy growing up, that's the one thing I wanted to do, was I wanted to fight in Ireland. Because I was a professional boxer, and that was my dream. And when I stopped boxing, I just assumed that was not going to happen. And then, that opportunity coming up, and it being a guy like Chris Lytle. And then what ended up happening is a couple days before the weigh-in, I got really, really sick, and the day of the weigh-in, I didn't go cut weight. I didn't do anything, and the UFC brought some EMTs to my room to check on me, and I just, I ended up, which never happens. I made weight without cutting weight. I mean, I was that sick. It was coming out of me both ends, man, bad, and the EMTs came to my room, and they were, wanting to, assist me, I guess you'd say. But there was a doctor that they put up in that room, and the guy was just being a jerk. And he was like, listen, here's the deal. He goes, if you really need this IV, if you need these IVs, you're not going to fight. So you got a choice. If you take the IV, you don't get to fight. But if you don't take the IV, we'll let you fight. And Mark Delagrati was in the room with me, my coach, and he was like arguing with a guy like that. Just makes no sense at all, man. It's like, So, anyways, the doctor said to the EMTs, he said, he had to leave. He got called out, and he said, I'm leaving, and do not give him an IV. Unless he's not going to fight. And the doctor walked out, and Mark Delagrati looked at the 2 EMTs, and he said, guys, this is so unfortunate that, you guys are here. There's an IV right there. He doesn't feel well. He's kind of hinting around at him. And the one EMT looks at the other EMT and says, want to go get a beer? And they both walk out of the room and leave the IV there. So quickly we get on the phone and we call the UFC doctor, Dr. Dave. He runs up to the room, sets me up, gives me the IV. And that whole night I drank a case of what's called cluster water, which all that means is water is a bound molecule, and what it does is it breaks up those molecules and allows the water on a cellular level to penetrate the cell easier through the cell wall easier, because it's not a bound, it's clustered rather than a bound. So anyways, I drank a whole case of that, and Mark Delagrati had mentioned before we did the walkout, after the fight, he had mentioned that before we did the walkout, he felt like he was walking me out for an execution, because I was so sick and all these problems. I don't know what happened, man. It's like, I don't want to get goofy and get mystical or whatever, but I was really sick. And going out there and hearing what I heard, it just like was, like I said, it was emotional. It was just completely amazing. And I rode that, like, whatever it was that the crowd was putting out there, the love or whatever you want to call it, I rode that. And that pushed me, through that fight. And, I started crying at the end of it when I was talking. I mean, it was, words can't describe. And I actually have somebody on YouTube shared my walkout and has the whole beginning. And I actually download it and I save it on my phone and I watch it every now and then to remind me. So
it was certainly one of those special moments as well.
Yeah.
In a way, you were our Irish hope at that time as well. Tom Egan fought on the undercard that night as well, but
right.
you obviously had the big Irish following there as well. Someone who actually ripped into you for your Irish heritage. I've actually just finished reading his book, was Dan Hardy. Obviously, when you were fighting Dan, he was trying to call you a plastic paddy, and he put up something on the Cage Warriors forum. Now, reading the book about that, Marcus, he said, he didn't realise you'd take it as serious as you did. So, looking back on that, did he really get into your mind and your head that much?
Yeah, because at that time, people don't know my background to begin with. So I've gone through all kinds of different, changes throughout my whole life as far as, my personality and who I am, because I grew up, poor, a dysfunctional kind of family, your typical fighter story. I was in trouble a lot. I got locked up as a kid for a while, in a place called the Maine Youth Center, which is, they just lock up kids there and they keep them there until they go to court, until they get 18 and they can get out. So I had those kind of issues. I was street fighting constantly. It was just who I was. And when I finally, when I finally had a child, I was still very young, that kind of started to change me into another person. And then when I had another one, I became a little bit of a better person. And then I started, I got into reading a lot of literature on all different religions and philosophies and beliefs and stuff like that. And I think that started to bring me. But the one thing I've always had that, until, I'd say in the last few years anyways, I've still had that street kid temper and mentality, and I just don't do well with disrespect at all, like any kind of disrespect. So he put all that stuff on there, and he got into my head. I got really angry, and I guess there's also an audio of us on the UFC, because somebody shared it with me, on a UFC call with a bunch of reporters and everybody asking us questions. And I just lost it on there. I lost it, and I was screaming at him and told him that, regardless of what happened in the fight, if I saw him on the streets, I was going to break his face. And, I was really angry. So, and at that time, I was just started, my children were going to a private Christian school. And this kind of stuff got out there. And, and I was kind of already the outsider of that area, that school, the parents all looked at my kids as, oh my God, that's that UFC fighter. So it was during a time of a lot of testing of my personality, my faith, and who I was as a man, and it did get to me, and I do regret that. And there's a lot of stuff as now that I'm in my mid 40s or approaching my mid 40s. I look back and I say, man, if I could do it all again, I would do it different. And that's one of them, definitely, because I just went out there that first round and just wanted to embarrass him. I wanted to knock him out quick, and I was able to smash him a little bit. And then I picked him up and I got him on the ground. I mounted him. I took his back. I mean, I went on him hard that first round, and after that, I think that my mind was already in a dark place. It wasn't really focused on the match at hand and what I should have been doing just to win. I was doing it literally just to hurt him, is what my thoughts were, as I just wanted to hurt him. And that, you can't do that because the MMA itself. Everybody wants to call it it's not real fighting. And I know I get a lot of flack for this, but it's not. I've been in real fights. Okay, I've been stabbed twice. I've been hit with a crowbar in the face. I got one of those 4-pronged tire irons in the head. I've had pint glasses and bottles, and I've been shot at. I mean, those were real fights. This is a sporting event, and it really comes down to you have a set of rules, and who can stay within those parameters of rules and choose the best tactics, the best techniques, and lie to the other guy. If you can, the best liars win fights. The guys that make you think you're going to do one thing and you do another, and the other guy falls for it, does a great setup, a feint, or whatever, and those are the great fighters. And that night, that wasn't me. I was not trying to do any of that stuff. I just wanted to run out and just smash him. So
he also spoke as well, saying he's buried the hatchet then sometime later after. Is that true?
Yeah, it's true. He came into the back room after I knocked out Jonathan Goulet, and we shook hands and we talked a little bit about it. And even since then, I had a message sent to him, a video message telling him that I thought it sucked. When I heard that he was having some health issues, and I didn't want that for him. That I was hoping that things would get better and he would feel better. But I was impressed with the work he had been doing with the media and everything, and that I just wished him luck. And that was it.
Do you think that some fighters, and I think Dan actually spoke about it before, saying once they finished fighting, they kind of not change as a person, but when they're fighting, they kind of change themselves to be more, not outspoken, but a different type of human being because they want to promote the fight? Do you feel that some fighters, once they finish, they'll kind of calm down a little bit?
Yeah, I think it, like you said, some fighters. I think it comes down to the individual. So I think when you come from like a background like me, or a background like might probably be similar, might be somebody like Nate Diaz or something like that. It's a different approach when you're a street kid of some sort than it is when you've been an athlete your whole life, when you've been part of teams and you've been playing sports your whole life. They have a whole different look at it. And, and I think that if we, the guys that are the street guys that, were fighting on the streets and doing all that stuff, if we were able to somehow not take it so seriously, like the sport itself, and let it and be able to take it like it truly is. It's a game. It's not a fight, and it's basically, to me, it's basketball with fouls. Mm. You know what I mean? So if you can look at it like that, you can keep your head on your shoulders and persevere. But when you turn it into something that it's not, which is what I did, And I'd done it before in the past at a couple of fights, and it actually worked out for me. Where I just got like Jess Leodon, he said a bunch of crap, and we had some issues with that, and I stiffed him cold in a minute in the first round or whatever it was. So, sometimes that does happen, and that energy, that anger kind of came out, and when I hit him, it did what it did. But other times, again, if a guy can weather that storm, you're going to have kind of that release, like that anger is going to leave at some point, and that driving force is gone. Now all you have is left is what you have, and if you've now had that big adrenaline dump or that big energy loss, it's hard to come back out of that.
Speaking of changing, how do you find the adaptation from going from fighter to coach? Do you find that when you're coaching a guy, do you try and coach them to your strengths, or in some ways I've heard people criticize coaches in a way that say they're trying to teach me to fight like how they fight? But how do you find the transition from fighter to coach?
Yeah, absolutely not. So as much as I talk about how I'm a street kid and all that stuff, or I was. Anyways, I got really interested in 2008 studying the brain, and how the brain works. And I started doing that originally out of fear, because a lot of my buddies that were boxers were all punchy. And, and at that point, I'd been fighting for, probably 14 years or 15 years as a professional, and had over, at that point, maybe like 190 or 180 fights with boxing, MMA, kickboxing, amateur pro, all that stuff. So I didn't want that to happen to me. So I started studying the brain and how the brain, concussions, and how, your neurocortex is responsible for your cognitive thinking and your frontal lobe, your cognitive thinking and your emotional well-being and stuff like that. So when I started doing that, I started doing like preventative stuff to keep my brain sharp. Trust me, I'll tie this all into coaching. To keep my brain sharp. So I started doing things like neuroprogramming. And by doing neuroprogramming and kept getting involved in the brain, I started studying neurolinguistics. So when I started reading books on neurolinguistics, that made things pop into my head like, oh my God, I can train myself to think this way, but I can also train other people more efficiently. So the idea is, when you're training somebody, depending on what kind of moves they are, right? So if it's knees and elbows, those are what we refer to as gross motor skill. If it's things having to do with maybe specific types of punches and stuff, you're talking sometimes, especially with footwork, you're talking complex motor skill. So those things are going to be put into your brain, or as they call, like your neural net, in a different way. So I started studying a way to coach people and try to bypass as fast as possible that constant cognitive thinking of flipping through the Rolodex to remember technique or whatever, and try to bypass that and go to your reactionary brain, like through your limbic system and stuff like that, to implant information faster. So, there's a couple of, guys out there that said, if you know nothing and you're starting from scratch, you could take like 10,000 hours or 10,000 repetitions in order to implant information, which is all horse crap. When in like what I do, or how I figured out how to do things. So when I train people, I absolutely don't train them anything like me. So a perfect example of this would be when I started with Tim Boetsch. So Tim Boetsch called me and said, hey, man, I know you're retired, and I was wondering if you wouldn't mind coaching me much. So here's the thing is, like, he and I were friends before, right before he got in the UFC. And then he knew what kind of, like, where my thoughts were and what my thoughts were on training. And I took him to Sit Yo Tong, and we've been around each other and for a few years. and we clicked real well. And I said, yeah, you know what? Why don't you, come back to Maine for a little bit, and we'll work for a little bit and see what you think. See if we match up well. So he came in, and with this night in particular, he had some sparring. So I had like 6 of my guys waiting to shark him, and he goes out and he starts sparring. The first round starts. And he's like dancing around and he's flicking a jab out and he's, and I'm watching him, and like maybe a minute and a half in, I screamed at him. I go, "Who are you?" And he looked at me and he goes, "What?" And I go, "Who are you, man? I don't even recognize you." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "You're friggin', dancing around out here. You're flicking a jab. You're taking your time. Like, that's not you, man. You're not me. You're not a guy that's going to slowly dismantle or take a guy apart. You're not a guy that's going to be using footwork to just create angles and be a counterpuncher, because that's another thing I was. You're a killer. So I know you like these guys, but they know who you are. They know what your style is. Style ain't my style. It's Tim Boetsch style. So Tim Boetsch style, the style that I know, is a guy who bites down on his mouthpiece, comes forward and scares the shit out of people, and throws heavy shots, and and will wrestle and just beat guys to a pulp. I said, so stop dancing around and flicking your jab and get out there and hurt some people. So he went out there, and by the end of that night, he was just smashing and twisting guys up and throwing guys on their heads. And afterwards, he said, that was one of the best sparring sessions he'd had in a long time. And, shortly after that, he said to me that this is the first time he felt like he was him, because everybody else wanted to change him. And I said, well, here's the idea here is like, it's better to, like Customato used to say, discover and uncover. So I would rather discover something that you do well, or uncover something that maybe you don't even know yet, and and add to that, but add to it, make it stronger, faster, better, but add to it too, because it might be something that makes sense. So we have conversations where I say, check this out, and I'll do something or work with them, and I'll say, what do you think? And if he says, it doesn't click, then we go on. Then he'll go, okay, wait a minute, I like that one. So we I'm not the coach, and I don't say it's my way. It's really up to the person that you're training, because if they don't believe in you, if they don't believe in you as a coach, if they don't believe in the techniques that you're teaching them, the tactics, it doesn't work. It's not going to work, because when it comes time to fight time, you're always going to go back to what you do, what you feel most comfortable with. And if you don't feel comfortable with the coaches and people that you're with, you're never going to perform. And and again, a lot of stuff that ties into the brain and the way that I try to teach. But with that said, I would rather embrace the individual. There are things that they do, and I might see it, and this is the way they do it. And I just, I look at them, like, especially the guys that have been fighting for a long time. They've got their sword, so I just want to keep sharpening that sword. So sharpen the sword, go into battle with the sword that they've been using, because I don't want to give them another sword. You give them another sword, they might not feel comfortable with it. It might not make sense to them. But if I can do that and maybe throw in a couple of tactics while they use their weapon, that's going to be that's a winning formula, I believe.
Speaking of Tim Boetsch, he has a big fight coming up against Johny Hendricks. Has fight camp started yet, or when does it start? And how do you see that going for Tim? Do you think that's a good matchup for him?
Well, he's basically right now, he's just kind of keeping himself in decent shape. I think we're like 14 weeks out, or maybe a little longer. I think we're about 14 weeks. But he'll be here with me come the beginning of May, and we'll start the real camp and really starting to push things then. And I think that it's a great fight for Tim. Not a good fight for Hendricks in that, you have two guys that are wrestlers, two guys that are known to be big punchers. But as far as I can remember, and I've gone through a lot of Hendricks fights too, because when I found out, I started watching stuff. The only one that I can remember that was like real big, real huge, was the knockout that he did on, was it John Fitch?
Yeah.
Like when he walked out and he just smashed John Fitch. But ever since then, he's just really, thumped people up and, definitely out-wrestled and beat him up a little bit. But Tim's a different beast. Johny Hendricks is a guy that's couldn't make 170 anymore and went to 85. Tim Boetsch is a guy that was a heavyweight fighter, won some heavyweight titles in some smaller organizations, then decided when he got to the UFC he was going to go to light heavy, competed at light heavy for a while, and then was able to figure out how to make 185. So, and every time Tim gets back into the cage, we shoot for 208. So he'll be 185 at weigh-ins or 186, and he'll be 208 when they fight. And I don't think, Hendricks will be like that. So, because I back and forth from like 210 to 205, and even when Tim gets to like 186, he still looks physically bigger than me. He just looks like a big gorilla, and so he puts all that weight, he takes it off and puts it on really fast, and it doesn't affect him as long as I say as long as he doesn't go over 208, because then he can get a little sluggish and it can slow you down. But that's our number. So if he stays between that, he'll be good.
There's been a lot of discussion about weight cutting lately in MMA. Does Tim have trouble making that weight, or does he make it perfectly fine, no health issues at all?
Yeah, no, he makes it fine. It's I'm gonna say it's a tough. I don't even know if I should say it's a tough weight cut. It's not. It's a pretty normal weight cut to me. I've done tough weight cuts, so I would say, me making 55, I dropped, I had to do, the most I ever did, I cut 52 pounds in 10 weeks. But I cut 23 pounds in 11 hours. So those were real serious weight cuts. So that's a lot different. So Tim, you typically, the day of the weigh-in, we wake up and he literally has like maybe 5 pounds left to go. So, he does a good job. He's a professional. It's, he does a really good job, and we do it safe too. We know how to do it differently than a lot of other people do.
One question I have for you, Marcus, this has been talked an awful lot about lately. You've fought professionally in both realms, so I thought I'd ask. The Conor McGregor Floyd Mayweather, it won't go away, the story. So just somebody like yourself who's experienced it, there's obviously such a huge difference, and do you give Conor McGregor any chance against a master like Floyd Mayweather?
Absolutely zero. So, unless they let him in there with a baseball bat or something like that, but he's not going to. Honestly, again, they're not even similar. The only thing that can be similar is that is that there's punches involved, and the gloves aren't even similar. Honestly, there's really nothing that I could tell you. Like when I go in and I box with people, because every now and then, if there's a big MMA place, they'll be like, oh yeah, hey, they're MMA guys, but they'll be like, hey, I'd like to just box with you and say I box with you. And then when I box with them, my stance, everything about what I do at that time looks nothing. It's like you would not play football the same way you would play basketball. Yeah. So when I box, everything that I do is completely different. And all those guys, like every time I've ever boxed with MMA guys, I've absolutely chewed them up and destroyed them. And it's just not even close to the same. Now, then when you enter kicks, it changes. So, it's not the same thing. Once you enter that one more weapon, it just all the rules change. So, you know, in MMA, we would never get real low and drop our head and be bobbing and weaving and such, and you know, pulling away and jerking around and leaving our legs there, because number one, if you drop your level too low, not only could you get kneed and stuff, but you're going to end up in a clinch. And if you end up in that tie clinch, you start taking knees or anything like that. You're not going to lean back like they do in boxing. You'll see guys, what we call the fade. Guys will fade back away out of the punches. You don't see that a lot in MMA because there's leg kicks. So if I lean away from a punch, I leave my lead leg there and I get my leg chopped. So there's all these different factors involved. And I understand, you know, he can, you know, there's some time that he's been boxing or he's done some boxing, and there's some time between now and then. But there's no way, you know, that you're going to be a football player and all of a sudden decide that you're going to go play basketball and beat Michael Jordan. And that's what he's doing. You know, he comes from a harder, tougher, rougher sport. You know, MMA is a much tougher, more complex sport. But boxing is a completely different sport, and it's one of those sports, like, if you just have it's a sport where natural ability, speed, height, reach, and hand-eye coordination and timing is everything. Like, so, you know, it's not the same thing in MMA, because anything can happen. You know, there's, you know, you have 5 ranges of combat. There's only one range of combat in boxing. It's hands. So, you know, just he's Mayweather's going to do whatever he wants. Even that last fight that Mayweather had, he fought that, I can't remember the guy's name, but the guy was a freaking killer. Yeah. The guy was a killer, and he made him look dumb. Yeah, you know, that's my thought. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the way Conor McGregor fights. So, like, watching his fights and stuff, he's very exciting. He's done unbelievable stuff for the sport. He's brought the sport to an area that it was not. I mean, you can't deny that. Anybody that wants to say whatever, you know, and in victory, you know, when he has a victory, he rubs people the wrong way because of the way he talks and how brash he is. But even in defeat, he does such a great job. Like, even when he lost to Diaz, the speech he gave was phenomenal, I thought. I was like, you know, people, I guarantee that there were people that were saying, I hope he loses that fight, and I want to hear what that big mouth says. And after he lost that fight, people felt bad for him, you know. So I think he's a master at what he does. And good for him to get paid, though. You know what I mean? He's going to, you know, he's made a good amount of money with the UFC, and he's going to make a ton if that Mayweather fight happens. And but he won't beat him. I mean, there's no way. It's, you know, I have a better chance of, you know, winning the lottery 10 times in a row.
Wow. Stephen Quattro said he wouldn't make it out of the 5th round. Do you see Floyd finishing him, or, as you said, just do what he wants and play with him?
Yeah, I think he's going to do what he wants. I don't think he's going to take any chances. But I think that what he'll do is, you know, he'll take his time, because you can do that in boxing, and set up that one big blow. He definitely isn't going to let him go the distance. There's no way he wants, because that would just be horrible for boxing. Yeah. Like, you know, it just would be bad. That would be like, you know, him going into MMA and winning by submission. You know what I mean? So it just, you know, boxing's not going to – no. There's no way Floyd Mayweather allows him to make it. I'm going to say, I think 5 rounds is pretty generous. Wow.
That's definitive there. Yeah. Listen, Marcus, it was an absolute honour to chat to you today. Thanks a million for taking the time to come on. We wish you the best with Tim Boetsch coming up as well against Johny Hendricks, and yourself as a coach. And again, I will go back to what I said at the start. For me, you're a legend of the sport. I loved watching you fight. You were never in a boring fight. And I had the pleasure of meeting you the
you.
last time you were over here in Dublin with here, and you're an absolute gentleman as well in person. So again, thanks a million for taking the time. Great to chat to you.
Yeah, thanks guys. I truly appreciate it, and be safe and good luck with the show.
Cheers, man.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Marcus.
Cheers. Take care. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. The Irish Hand Grenade.